Good evening and welcome to the 26th meeting for the Planning Board of fiscal year 2023. At this time, I'd like to now call the meeting to order and begin by introducing members of the board. If we could start. Cheryl?
Cheryl Tagayas, Secretary.
Jim?
Jim Davis, member.
Maggie?
Maggie Oldfield, member.
And myself, Meredith Hall, serving as chair. We are without Sean this evening. So we can now begin with our administrative items. The approval of minutes. If everyone has had a chance to look them over, there were some last minute edits to April 27th. So I think we should defer those until our next meeting, which will be June 8th. If everyone has had a chance to review May 1st and May 2nd.
I did make edits to those as well. Did you see those?
No, I did not. Okay, so why don't we
might
defer?
just defer them all.
Yes, defer May 1st, May 2nd, and April 27th to June 8th for approval. Okay, thank you. And our next meeting dates, we know we have the June 8th meeting. And Tim, is there any reason that you think the second meeting will need to be changed in June? Or does that?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay, so that will be, so yes, so June.
Are we not planning on meeting on the 22nd of May?
No, we are not.
Got it.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of folks out of town on that day.
Yeah, it was the 25th.
25th.
Actually, but yes, we have, but there will be, just to make an announcement, and Tim, I think you can address this also, is our meeting on the 18th, the MBTA Community Forum. I think we want to make sure people get that date in as well.
Are we posting for that as a planning board?
Why don't we go into staff update, and Tim, we can talk about that as part of it.
Yeah, and actually we have a further down the line agenda item to just kind of talk about the planning for that forum. I mean, we can certainly post it. I think obviously members that you all should come. I don't think it'll function as a planning board meeting in the sense that, you'll be on the spot to deliberate or vote on anything. But, if you're all going to be in the room and you want to do that, we can certainly post it as a planning board meeting.
Great.
I think it's worth doing.
Better safe than sorry.
Great. So then we will be looking at the June 8th meeting and then the June 22nd as our next formal meeting. And we could continue. June 18th. May 18th. It's May 18th and then actually is June 8th and then the 22nd happens to be the second Thursday of the month. Great.
But we're going to post on the 18th as a meeting, but just
Yes.
no
So
agenda
we're actually,
necessarily.
yeah.
I guess.
So one more meeting, and that'll be it for June. Okay, so Tim, you can continue if you want with any updates that you have.
I mean, everyone went to town meeting, so you all know what we've been spending a lot of our time on is, that zoning recodification article. So that passed. So we've been just processing the paperwork to get that to the Attorney General's office, for their review. We'll give you all a little bit of a break on recodification, but I think in relatively short order, we should probably talk about a strategy, for kind of continuing that work. There's a couple, obviously, I think informally we can, begin to or continue to look through, the recodified general code manuscript, even before it gets posted and approved. If you see things, we can definitely make note of them and kind of figure out how to address them. The other thing I did want to mention, though, is, and this has been a part of the materials from way back when, I don't know if we've had a chance to really talk about it in depth recently, is the editorial and legal analysis that General Code performed on our zoning bylaw. We were very focused in this go around of just simply getting it updated, getting the articles all together and getting it into a format that we can get online, so we have a current up-to-date bylaw. Part of the next step is to actually evaluate the content of the bylaw And not even for things like, we want to adjust height limits or setback limits or anything, but literally going in and checking in on, references to state law, for instance, that are no longer operative or have been updated. This is something that, we all try to keep track of, but, sometimes a state law changes that affects something that's referenced in our zoning, and we're kind of caught unawares of it. General Code has done that analysis for us. Those are substantive changes. So those are things that the planning board will need to review, and whether they want to recommend we make those changes or not, that'll be subject to further town meeting action. The benefit of this exercise is, we've done the recodification, everything has been reformatted and reorganized, and B, General Code has done the work, and they've said, here's the issue, here's the potential solution, here's why we think the solution is a good idea. And it's like doing homework. You go through the workbook and you say thumbs up, thumbs down. It's really easy. I mean, to the extent that anything zoning is easy to understand, it's really easy to understand. And especially for town meeting members, very clear, exercise in terms of understanding what the potential changes are, and understanding what the planning board's recommendation is. So, like I said, we can maybe cool off with zoning for a little bit, but, I think it's a worthwhile discussion to pick back up relatively soon, so that we can, not have a kind of, a zoning bylaw that still has, errors, omissions, and kind of outdated material lying around. The other thing I wanted to mention is we had a staff level meeting with our consultants at MAPC relative to the East Milton zoning, just giving them some additional background that may not have been in the RFP about the history of planning in the neighborhood, kind of what some recent developments in terms of 440 Granite Ave and the 40B project, just to give them a little bit more context about kind of what they're getting into over in East Milton. So Chris Kuschel from MAPC is kind of taking all of that into advisement, and we're going to be relatively soon scheduling a kickoff meeting with the planning board, so that we can kind of get moving and have a good understanding of what the public process is going to look like, what the planning board's role is going to be. So that'll be something that I'm hoping that we can get done and get on the books in June sometime, whether it's at a regular planning board meeting or if we wanted to have a kind of a one-off to put some time and effort behind that. But we'll keep you updated on that. And that's all I've got for now. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Cheryl had a question regarding the
Right.
recodification.
Well, we always think it's nice to take a break on zoning. The fall town meeting creeps up on us, and by the time you backtrack, if you work your way backwards, you really don't have much time. And so I thought we should think about if we are going to have zoning for a fall town meeting. I know we've talked about MBTA communities for December, but I think that could be aggressive. But even if that does happen for December, do you know, Tim, if the select board has been talking about a fall town meeting? Like normally they would be thinking October.
I haven't heard anything from the select board. I think the understanding is that MBTA communities is going to drive the decision about a special town meeting later in the year. So, but other than that, I really haven't heard anything. There's a lot of focus on the annual, obviously, but we can continue to kind of talk with them about, and I think, Cheryl, I don't mean to be flip about, taking a break from zoning. I just meant like, we don't have to talk about it tonight. We can maybe move on to a couple weeks from now. But I think, a lot of that will be driven by, what is the planning board's intent in terms of other articles potentially beyond MBTA communities. We're obviously kind of trying to hit our compliance deadlines for MBTA communities, but as I've said in the past and will continue to say, I think we should get it right rather than quick. And so I think the planning board's other priorities relative to zoning will also have an influence on the decision about if and when a special town meeting will be held. So I can check in with the town administrator and see if there's been any discussion about articles for a potential fall town meeting. And I'll also obviously keep them apprised of what the planning board is up to and thinking in that regard.
So I'd like to make a request. I helped Josh reconstitute or recreate the list of zoning articles that the planning board had been considering. And some, included ADUs, some the lighting that was just brought to us not too long ago.
Bylaw.
Yeah, at one time, someone,
Get the list too.
yeah, fences on scenic ways. There's various things, and I think we all should look at them and prioritize and say, if there is
on the
going,
agenda, yeah.
yeah, it's just so that, and then back it up, backtrack, because these things, as I said, in my experience, they take time. By the time they open and close the warrant, we only have a couple of months, which
Right, I
seems
think-
kind of crazy, but.
And when we were talking about those, we didn't know about the MBTA zoning that was coming on. So that sort of jumped into
Yeah, and it may be that
becoming
that's
a
all-
priority that, because we want to get these things right. And, we have meetings till 11:30. It was a list that we had discussed previously, and I have a list, and we can put that on the agenda just to talk about and put a priority list
Yeah,
together.
the planning department had been keeping a list, and with staff changes, so that the sort of digital version of that had sort of been unfound, let's say. Josh went back and looked at annual reports where they have a record of town meeting and which ones the town meeting voted to send to the planning board for further study. And then there were ones that the planning board had been interested in, or residents had brought to the board and asked us to consider. So there's, how they got on this list varies, but it's kind of like a good idea to have the list, because I think we want to encourage people, if they do bring things to us, and not have them feel as if they get lost and don't get brought back up, right? So
So how would a guy like me access that list?
they're going to have to
We
share
can
it with us.
provide, yeah, we can put it on the agenda and have it.
Yeah, I'll share it out to you all if you decide to put it on the agenda.
And when you make that list, could you put the year in which it was brought forward?
Yes, that's on it.
Okay, because it would be, to Cheryl's point, I feel like Cheryl worked hard on the cut and fill bylaw, and I feel like that really should take a priority, because I don't know how
And I
close you are.
think
to-
part of that, the reason why that didn't start was because of the recodification, and we were talking about how things were going to be arranged. So that was part of the reason why that.
Yeah, and that one also, we were trying to coordinate with the building commissioner and the engineering department, because there was a little bit of overlap, and it was actually interesting. The building commissioner had some interesting insights, so we're losing him, obviously, as of tomorrow. So we'll have to go back and look through our notes for those, but we do have some notes from those earlier meetings. But it
would
is
be a
an
good
important one,
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
to bring back to the forefront.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Okay, so.
But into
yeah,
the
sorry.
recodification, I do think it is important, and I feel like we're kind of on a roll with it, and it's in the
Yeah.
forefront of town meeting members' minds, so I don't want that to fall off.
Right.
So I think we should.
And with a
focus
new
on that.
building commissioner coming in, he'll need it, so, yeah. Okay, great. So now we can move on to citizens speak. If there is anyone in the audience who would like to speak to something that's not on the agenda, when it comes to the agenda item, you will have time to speak on that item. But if you'd like to speak about anything else, please feel free, or raise your hand if you're on
Am I
Zoom.
on the agenda item?
You are.
Yeah,
Yes, yes, you certainly are.
this doesn't, I've only got one page of the thing.
That's all right, we have you down, yes.
You're good.
Okay. Are we seeing any hands up from the audience? Okay.
No hands.
Worn out. too.
Okay. So then we can now open the public hearing for 1041, 1065 Brush Hill Road subdivision modification, which is continued from 427.
Can I just interrupt for a minute?
Sir,
I was
yes.
told by the assistant there that they were gonna take the first 5 minutes to approve this. But that was inaccurate, apparently?
Yes, we're going to move something. This should not be too lengthy, and then we're moving a second public hearing, and you'll be the third item.
Good evening.
Good evening, welcome.
Doug Troyer on behalf of the Johnsons, Jim Basile.
Great. Welcome.
As you know, at the last hearing, it was requested that I forward a draft decision and make some adjustments to the A&R plan. We forwarded that draft decision last week, and basically on the revised plan, we included the 50-foot setback from 1053's property and added a note that the 50-foot setback from that property shall apply to any future building built after the proposed building as shown. We also provided the board with a colored version that identified the location of the new sewer connection that had been constructed for the existing carriage house, which will be used for the revised building, as well as provided measurements for a proposed building on the colored plan. And then the draft decision, I went through the conditions that we're looking to modify, identified what we were looking to do, and then provided a ultimate list at the end of the proposed revised conditions.
Did any of the board members have questions? I thought you did a very nice job, and it was very clear the way it was laid out for
I appreciate that.
when, people move on from this board and the
Yeah.
neighborhood. It gives very good information and very clearly written.
Great, thank you.
I do
Yes,
have
yes.
a question, and I read the draft decision. Thank you for providing that. We had talked about, the language is, there's dwelling, there's structure, there's building, kind of used almost interchangeably.
Yeah,
And
your definition of building is the word building shall include structure. Basically, it's like saying a fence and an encroachment. It's basically a building covers any addition, any structure, anything in which we would be looking to do in the future on that 50-foot setback would come into play.
so can we just go to where that is set, those words, or those terms are used again? Because
Yeah, that's going to be, probably the easiest way to look at that is on the page 4 of the draft decision.
Okay.
It's condition 4. And basically, any new dwelling, we're not amending the first sentence of condition 7, which is now condition 4. So any new dwelling in lot 2 shall be set back a minimum of 75 feet from the upper road lot line and 15 feet from the lot line between lot 2 and parcel A. A 50-foot setback from 1053 Brush Hill Road shall apply to any future building built after the proposed building as shown on lot 2 is constructed. That's the language that we added in connection with the abutters concern about making sure that any addition, any building, any structure, anything that we construct after we construct this raise and rebuild of the carriage house is subject to that 50-foot setback.
So any addition, any deck, any fence, anything of that nature is covered by the word building.
Yeah, because building, basically pursuant to section 1 of your definitions, the word building shall include structure. And by identifying it that way, it's going to cover all of those items. It's all inclusive, the way in which your bylaw is written. And maybe when you're looking at revising a bylaw, maybe take a look at that. And maybe put some additional clarifications in there on that one as well.
Yeah.
But the way it's written today, it's all encompassing. And anybody who's looking to do anything subsequent to the raise and rebuild of the carriage house is going to be subject to that condition that any building, including any structure that's going to be put on that property, has to be within the 50-foot setback.
Okay, and then in that,
It has to be outside the 50-foot
Right.
setback.
and in that sentence where it says, after the proposed building, where at the
building as
beginning
shown
it
on
is
lot 2.
dwelling. So is it the dwelling, any new
I'm
dwelling?
happy to change the first word, any new building on lot 2
Yeah,
shall be set back. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine with changing that so that it's consistent with the
that's,
bottom.
yeah.
The only reason I didn't change it is because I wasn't changing the first sentence of the original condition.
I just think it's clearer.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay, so
That was the comment that I had, or question I had, so.
number 4, change the word dwelling to building.
Yeah, any new building
Okay.
instead of dwelling.
Very minor thing. Is there anyone, any of the neighbors who would like to come and speak to this as well? Is there anyone who would like to comment on? Yeah.
want to make sure, I think Cheryl was talking about the point about an addition to the new barn, the new building. I just want it to be clear that it would be subject to that.
Setback.
Right, and I think that sometimes if things kind of drop off or they're not clear, and when we were here having the hearing before, the last hearing, it wasn't really clear amongst you guys. And so if it's not clear amongst you, then it doesn't bear well for the citizen, the owner, the public. So I think it's important that it be clear. And if that is the zoning definition,
Yeah.
then, and that's crystal clear, then, that's okay. But, you guys doing your job need to make sure that it is
Correct. That structures, any structure or addition is covered under that. Okay.
to the new building.
So while you're here, I did call Tim about this today. And Tim, you looked up the definition of building. So I'm sorry, Mr.
Oh, and Becky, could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry, I meant to, just for the record.
I'm Becky Simons, and I live at 1053 Rush Hill Road.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
So the way Mr. Troyer described the definition of building, Tim, that's consistent with your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. So it says here, a 50-foot setback from 1035 Brush Hill Road shall apply to any future building built after the proposed building as shown on Lot 2 is constructed. So based on our definition of building, that's what I was called Tim about earlier, and that's what I raised here, is I wanted to be sure that what we spoke about at our last meeting, that any construction, any new construction, whether it's an addition of any sort,
Right.
deck or what have you, would fall under this.
Yeah.
So I just want to point out that language is here.
That's
good.
That was my.
That's a good question, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the? Yes,
I don't have any.
So then,
I have a question.
yes, Jim.
Was the resurfacing done? Was
No,
that
so
pushed forward or something?
So the resurfacing hasn't been done. That's why we are basically also looking to have the deadline for that to be completed within 1 year of the approval of the subdivision. For one way or another, two of the property owners that were subject to it, I think, sold their property. And Ms. Turner, when she owned the property, she immediately sold 1065, I believe, to somebody who the Johnsons ultimately purchased it after, I think in 2020. She may have sold it in 18, I'm not sure. Johnson's acquired it. Johnson's also acquired 1041 in Parcel A. And by the time my clients had acquired the property, no one had basically followed up on the resurfacing. So when we came back before you, we wanted to identify what conditions have been complied with and what was remaining. And that's one of the remaining ones. And we have all intents and purposes. We held a neighborhood meeting prior to our filing of this application. And the goal is to, unfortunately, get a new estimate for what that's going to be, identify who's responsible for the cost of that. My clients were already funded 50% of 1065s, which is being held in escrow. And basically the neighbors are going to work together within the year. We don't want to do the road until the construction is done, primarily because you don't really want to resurface something that could have some issues with construction vehicles traveling over. So that's our intent.
My follow-up might be a question to the board. So we're signing off on this, that the neighbors are going to do this paving, right?
Yeah.
What if they don't? I mean, I just don't know how that works long-term, right?
It's how it was last time. It's basically
was
one of the neighbors or a building commissioner could keep an eye on this condition, and if in fact it isn't done within a year, call us back in and basically identify why it has been done. So it is something in which it's not only my clients, but it's also 1, 2, 3, 4 other property owners. I'm not sure why. I have no idea why it wasn't complied with before. And that's why I wanted to bring it to a head, because it's a new owner, and we're trying to be as neighborly as possible, and we want to comply with stuff. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish here.
I'm a new guy on the board, so I'm not sure how
It was a
works.
pre-existing condition to the original subdivision plan.
so what I would say, sorry, Maggie, go
My
ahead.
question was just, is a year enough time? Because if a year goes by quickly, and so I'd hate for you to have to come back
Yeah.
if it's a year and a half or
Is
18 months.
Thad on the phone? Is there anybody else?
Yes.
Is Thad on? Have you heard him on?
That. Let me, let's see what.
Our existing architect's not available tonight, so someone's standing in, so I'm not sure if we know the exact question, but when we put it together, I did have conversations to think if that was. Worst case scenario, we'll come back in and try and amend that to
Just
give us
trying to
additional
save a little
time.
bit of time, is it better to
Yeah.
put a year and a half or 2 years?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's Thad Samasco, the architect here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Welcome, Deb.
Yeah, I think, the plans and the contractor are ready to go for this relatively small building. I think a year is enough time, but a 3-month safety factor, if you will, just because how the supply chain and construction boom still happening is affecting construction times. If we could get 15 months, that'd be great, but I think we can get it done in a year if that's the board's requirement.
Yeah, and the good
I would
news
be
is
fine
a
with
year from now is this time of year, so it's not the winter time. I would say if we're in the winter, it does it, but if the board is inclined to give us an additional 3 months as a wiggle room, not going to fight that.
I don't have a problem with that. That seems very reasonable with,
I was just going to say that, excuse me, in terms of how the enforcement of that provision would be if you're building the residence, so the building inspectors will be inspecting the residence. If you did time it such that the building inspector could confirm this, it just kind of, especially where we have a new building commissioner coming in, it's one of those things like how they go follow up on some of these things that get into a permit like this later. Like, it's been years
You guys
now.
could schedule a follow-up in 12, 13, 14, 15 months and see if that condition has been complied with. You can add that as a condition if you wanted to. If you really are concerned about.
we could add subject to follow-up with the building commissioner.
Yeah, I'm not
I
that
don't think we
concerned. I
have
just want
to-
to make sure it happens.
Yeah, well, that's,
Yeah.
I'm not going to police it, but
Yeah,
just,
no.
we're signing off on something
The
where
good
5
news
members are going to
is
be in
that there's
agreement.
other, yeah, the good news here is that it's not just me saying it to you. There's other
Yeah.
parties that want to have this done, that if it doesn't get done pursuant to our agreement to get it done. So it's not just us that have to police ourselves. You also have 4 other neighbors that are involved in this who would also police it as well. And obviously, if you put a notation or something that's involved in this, you could do that
And
as well.
report back
But
to them.
it was a miss the first time. If I was the same applicant before you in 2017 and I hadn't gotten it done, I really don't have a good explanation for you. I know that there was issues with the prior applicant and with the town and other stuff, so it's not surprising to me that some things fell through, but I also know that 2 of those owners that were involved in 2017 has sold, and I think there's new owners there, and it may have just slipped through the cracks. And that's why I wanted to bring it to a head, to get it done. And my clients have expressed an extreme desire to basically comply with what they are required to do.
So would the board like to add language just saying to report back to the board?
I would
on
say report to the
the building commissioner.
the planning director.
Planning director.
And then the planning director can inform us of satisfactory compliance or a status update.
So maybe the last sentence, which researching shall be completed within 15 months of the approval of the subdivision amendment, and notice to the building commissioner shall be provided upon completion.
Did you get that?
Josh, can you just make these changes and track changes? Don't make it in comments, just make it right in the text.
But through the planning director.
I would say the building commissioner and the planning director.
Yeah.
Just because,
Do you want that repeated?
So we're changing a 1 year to 15, so it'd be the last 2 sentences. Which resurfacing shall be completed within 15 months of the approval of this subdivision amendment, and notice of completion shall be provided to the planning director and building commissioner.
and if you're making this real-time change, that dwelling changing it to building happens in 2 places, Josh.
See that in 4. Where's the other one?
It's in the,
Any replacement building, paragraph 1, any replacement building for the existing structure on 1041 Brush Hill Road shall be fitted with a fire suppression. So, yep, that's fine.
That's,
Consistency is key.
so Josh, you gotta keep going down to number 4. You see that, right?
Oh, he's doing it right
so,
there.
yeah, he's doing it.
And I see it live right here on my
Yeah.
screen too, because it's the same document, which is
And,
a
and,
handy way to do it.
and then in paragraph 3, before the and, just make it a comma after subdivision, comma, lowercase and.
Cheryl, you can see his changes live on your computer?
Yeah.
How are you doing that?
I opened it from the shared
Open it up.
drive.
Very cool.
That link that Tim shared with us, if you open it directly from there.
You see what
It's easier for me to see here than up there.
Yeah.
Easier for me
Yeah.
to see up there than here.
Josh, paragraph 3, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Nope.
but paragraph 3 where you added the word and. Oh, can you hear me? Lowercase a and a comma instead of the period after. There you go. And then unfortunately, you got to make the same edits to the
Right,
page 4.
exactly.
You have to make sure you don't edit it after they edit it.
Oh, I tell you,
Yeah.
I fear it.
Don't touch it.
That's
I'm just
my
trying to
fear.
find it. I can't find it, sorry.
You didn't find it?
It'll be a tutorial some other time. I'll
Okay.
hold up the meeting if my IT skills aren't that strong.
I'll show you.
Did I capture those edits?
That's
Doug?
it, but the final conditions, because the board wanted a complete list, page 4, it's basically making the same edits that you just made there to the final.
The shared drive, what his.
And then changing the text, got it.
Yeah.
This is in my old email. I haven't set that county one yet. So maybe but this, I must have it.
Yeah.
It's got it.
I think we could close the public hearing.
Thanks. And Josh, do you mind emailing that to me whenever you get a chance?
Of course, it'll be 10 in the morning.
Thank you so much.
And if there are no other hands from the public that would like to speak, we can go ahead and close the public hearing at this time. Are we not seeing any other
None.
from the audience? That's, or memory, yes, on Zoom or in the audience. Okay, not seeing any. Can I have a motion to close the public hearing for 1041 and 1065 Brush Hill Road, approval of modification of subdivision?
So moved?
A second.
Great, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. All right, so now any further discussion by the board? Is there anyone else who'd like to comment? Then I would then like to entertain a motion for the approval of modification of subdivision 1041 and 1065 Brush Hill Road.
In accordance.
Meredith, could you authorize me to sign that?
Yes, and with the changes that have been made and documented this evening. And we will like to, so who would like to make that motion?
I will make that motion.
Great.
So it would.
Authorize.
Yeah, the motion would be to approve to grant approval of the modification of subdivision for 1041, 1065 Brush Hill Road in accordance with the written document as amended tonight, and to authorize the planning director, Tim Zawinski, to sign on our behalf.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second? All right, all in favor? Aye.
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 Great.
Great.
Congratulations. Thank you.
So we'll, how does the Mylar plan work with you guys?
I just bring it to Tim and sign it.
He knows better than me.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Easy. Thank you.
thanks.
Have a good evening.
It's good. You
Bye.
too.
Enjoy
Thanks
your
so
trip.
much. Thank you. And
Good night, all. Thank you.
okay. Okay, so we are good on that. Great. So now I would like to reopen the public hearing for 111 Highland Street Memory Care, continued from April 13th. We have been asked, or Tim, would you like to just speak to this before we move?
Yeah, we got a request from the applicant to continue this. We got some, we had gotten a peer review report from Sean Reardon of Tetra Tech. The applicant had made some changes and responses to that report. We just this week got Sean Reardon's follow-up comments, as well as initial traffic and circulation comments. So they felt that rather than kind of spin their wheels, that's my term, at a hearing tonight, they want to take a little bit of a closer look at those comments and work with Sean and the fire chief around trying to find some solutions to some of the issues that Sean Reardon brought up in terms of, I think, particularly emergency access and circulation around the site. That was a big thing that we've heard mentioned from folks in the public hearing. I think board members have noticed that was a flag for Sean, and so the applicant will be working on some potential fixes for that. And so hopefully June 8th we see some changes that affect some of those issues. The other thing that I'll mention is I have a call tomorrow morning with GZA, which is another engineering firm that the Conservation Commission frequently works with, to take a look at the groundwater impacts of the proposal. Sean and his firm have been looking at traffic and civil engineering and stormwater. And I think if anyone who followed the Canton Ave hearing at the 40B recently understands that this area, and we've heard it from residents in the public hearing as well, that the groundwater in the area is a challenge. And so we will be, I'm kind of working out a scope of work with GZA tomorrow. We'll get them all the materials they need. And hopefully, again, by June 8th, we'll have some review of the groundwater impacts of the project as well.
Great. All right, so we will be moving that public hearing till the applicant has time to prepare to our June 8th meeting. And we already have scheduled 1200 Brush Hill Road. So, and I don't have the exact time on that, that we moved it to 7:10 most likely. So we could move this to 7 o'clock and then let them go first, or what would you recommend, Tim, as far as time? Because Brush Hill Road, we're going to want to go first. Does anyone recommend what the 1200 Brush Hill Road start time?
I don't know. I think if we continue this one to 7:10, even if it matches up, you can pick and choose which one goes first. 1200 Brush Hill Road, we may be able to get over and done with in relatively short order. It would be nice to get that off the plate, but you all are the boss. So I think 7:10 continuation is fine.
Okay. So can I have a motion to move the public hearing for 111 Highland Street Memory Care to June 8th at 7:10? So moved. Would you like to make the motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
To move the memory care hearing to
June
June 8th
8th,
at 7:10.
Yes, is there a second?
And I second.
Great. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you.
You do such a good job. That's great.
Yeah. Okay,
The newbie needed a chance on a simple
First
one, right?
motion.
yes. And now we can go on to our new business and 18 Jeremiah's Way, lot covenant release. And we can welcome the residents.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. If you could just introduce yourself and state your
John
name.
Rowan, 18 Jeremiah's Way, Milton, Mass.
Great,
I
welcome.
think that covenant was back, it's like 30-something years old.
Yeah.
And it was never signed off. We're trying
Right.
to sell the house and they found it
Yeah.
on the deed.
Yeah.
So it has to be signed. The lot, we did 2 lots at the same time. One was signed, one was not. I don't know why,
Yeah.
But
Why
it's-
didn't we do the release?
but the lawyers found it when they were researching the deed. So
Absolutely. Because it looks like it was contingent upon
I
the
think it was
roads and
because
the
we didn't-
utilities.
We were the
being put in.
developers, we put the road in.
Okay,
So that was done so that we didn't have to pull a big performance bond or something. They didn't want us to abandon the project and
Sure.
they wanted to be able to go after us somehow.
sure.
But everything was done and, permitted and everything.
And that makes sense.
So-
Yeah.
Yeah, Meredith, just to follow up, I mean, this is a relatively straightforward one, but obviously, understanding the principle behind a lot under covenant rather than a sort of cash security bond. Obviously, as Mr. Owen can attest, that the lot was sold, and so I think this is just a sort of clerical thing where no one at the time went back to the planning board to get a release of the lot. I did double check. I went down to Jeremiah's Way. It is kind of tucked away over there. A nice little neighborhood over there. The road it's a road, a little cul-de-sac. I checked in with DPW. Jeremiah's Way was accepted as a town way back in like 1990. So there's literally nothing. There's no implication to this at all. It's really just cleaning up a clerical thing on the deed. So if the board votes to release this and authorize me to sign off on it, we have a form that we can sign and get notarized and have Mr. Owen just bring that to the registry and get that on the deed, and he'll be good to go.
That sounds good.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
What? When will they have what? Tomorrow morning. I think if you guys
Yeah,
sign tonight,
Tim, we're
Tim has
authorizing
said
Tim to sign for us. So,
Yeah.
yes.
so he said he could get it notarized in the morning and then I could take it to the attorney
Yeah.
tomorrow. Okay, thank you, Tim.
Thanks.
Sorry, Mr. Owen, what I'll say is I maybe if you want to come by around 10:30 or 11.
Perfect, yep,
All right.
great.
So are you ready for
Yeah.
a motion? You want me
Yes.
to make this one, Maggie?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I move to accept the application for release of covenant for 18 Jeremiah's Way, and to authorize the planning director, Tim Zawinski, to sign on our behalf.
Second. Good. All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Great. Hey,
All
thanks
set.
very much.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. All right, now jumping to our old business. Next on the agenda is the MBTA communities. And Tim, you can give your report on that.
So we got 2 or 3 things going on. Just to give you all a little bit of an update, let me grab my email here. We've been having biweekly check-ins with UTIL. They're not doing any modeling work for us right now. We'll get to the modeling work in a minute. But they are working on some visualizations of and we're trying to kind of focus first on the transit area, which I think I think we're kind of locked in at a kind of a scale in the transit zone in terms of relatively low density, as low as we can get. on small lots. And so UTL is going to be working on some visualizations of what the sort of typical development could potentially look like. And so they are going to be establishing kind of parcel size typologies by looking at the sort of transit area and kind of figuring out on a little bit of a more fine-grained level, yes, we understand what the size of these parcels are, but kind of what is the general kind of shape of them, in terms of what could be expected to sort of be reasonably developed. It's an important exercise because, we have kind of drawn a line around and we've modeled the entire transit area, but for a variety of reasons, I don't think we'll end up zoning the entire transit area. Doing that, kind of affects the numbers that the model puts out in a way that's going to cause issues for us in terms of either over zoning on a unit capacity level or under zoning on a density level. And so, a good example is, some of those parcels in the B zone and the Columbines, which are sizable parcels. If you just looked at a list of parcel sizes, you'd be like, oh, this is a 20,000 square foot parcel. But when you look at it on a map, I mean, some of these houses that are kind of built into the cliffs, they're sort of, regular frontage, and they kind of wedge back, a couple hundred feet, which, gives you square footage, but doesn't really give you a footprint for, anything that could be called a reasonable multifamily development. Zoning, and I'm not saying that there's going to be any decision one way or the other about which areas get zoned or which areas don't get zoned. What I'm saying is that UTL is kind of doing some of the analysis of, here's where you can expect, a reasonable expectation of some type of redevelopment. And here's where parcels, by virtue of their size and shape, are very challenged. The reason why you want to think critically about that is, if you are zoning for large parcels that either can't be developed or won't be developed for whatever reason, you're not getting credit for the unit capacity, but you're getting dinged on the sort of the gross area. And so you want to be very deliberate about where your boundary line is. And so they're kind of looking at that on a more finer grained level in that regard. And so, next week, by Thursday, which we may be able to incorporate some of this into our update at the forum, they're going to be sort of, doing that kind of, finer grained parcel size typology analysis. The other thing that we'll have before the end of the month is 3D visualizations of what we hope to be, reasonably sized multifamily buildings in the Granite Ave subdistrict. The way that the model is, the model is a numbers exercise, and so you put numbers in and it spits out numbers, which is great and a marvel of kind of software, but also it doesn't have the intuition of, a human, for instance. And so, when you put in setbacks and dimensional regulations, it'll spit out a number saying like, oh, you can fit 1,000 units on, the state DPW yard. We don't want that. So what we're trying to do is, using the urban design, expertise and kind of experience that UTL has. We've given them some broad parameters around dimensions, no taller than 6 stories, setbacks, similar to other kind of larger multifamily buildings, in Milton and in the area, and kind of start with a design and then back into dimensions and a density level that we can then feed into the model and get something that's appropriate. So they'll be doing that. And then again, 3D test fits of different small multifamily typologies in the transit area. So using that analysis they're doing on parcel sizes to then inform, these 3D test fits. And so that's a work product we'll have by the end of the month. And we'll be able to share that with the board. The other thing that we're working on is we just had a meeting with our technical assistance providers at MAPC to build on the modeling work that UTL has been doing. The presentation that I gave last week, kind of outlining what we learned from the first run of the model that UTL did, is basically that at the densities that we prefer, and I say we, I mean, it's not. I think I speak for people when I say we don't want to have a ton of high density development in the sort of residential areas in the transit area. The parcels just can't handle it. So at that preferred density, we're getting a lot of units in terms of, credit for unit capacity, but we're not reaching the minimum density levels that we need to hit. And you have to remember the kind of the three constraints and the three kind of minimums that are in the statute. Or in the guidelines. One is the minimum size of the district, which no worries there. We're going to have more than 50 acres of a district just by virtue of how the district is going to be shaped and what we need to do from a density perspective. There's the unit capacity. How many potential units could potentially be built under this zoning? Again, we're way over that right now, which in some ways is a good thing, but in other things is a challenging thing. And we're not at the 15 unit per acre density level. So all of the districts, all of the sub-districts combined, whether they're contiguous in the transit area or they're elsewhere in town, which we're allowed to do half outside of the transit area, those all need to average out to 15 units per acre. And so, we're not hitting those numbers in the transit area, even with, significant density at Granite Ave. And so, based on feedback that we got at the last meeting, we've kind of instructed MAPC to do a couple things. One is to look at, in a more kind of fine-grained way, the existing multifamily or the existing larger kind of parcels in the transit area, particularly between Milton Village and Central Ave, and then at Unquity House. And rather than just sort of blanket zone those the same as we're zoning a one family house on Capon Street, let's actually, because the original analysis that we had UTL do did not have that gradation. It was, 131 Elliott Street is a 1 acre parcel. You get 3 units per parcel. So we were only getting credit for 3 units on 131 Elliott Street. So we want to correct for that, obviously. And so, we've drawn up a district or a sub-district, I should say, that kind of encompasses 88 Wharf, goes up to 2 Adam Street, crosses over to 1 Elliott, captures Milton Hill House, new Milton Hill House, and then kind of goes into the Central Ave Business District. And we'll be giving them some density and some dimensional parameters to just kind of see, raising up the density on those parcels, which are more appropriate for denser development. That it already exists. We've got 38 units an acre at 131 Elliott Street, 24 units per acre at 88 Wharf, 34 units per acre at 36 Central. These are density levels that we already have and already live with. And, albeit it's a special permit process, we've approved those. And so we'll be using those levels as a kind of guide to see, like, okay, if it's cool here, let's apply it to these other parcels and see what we get and see if that can boost up our density levels. The other thing that we're asking MAPC to do is to look at some additional larger parcels outside the transit area. So we had UTL model East Milton. We're taking East Milton out of the mix. We've already got a zoning process over there. I think we're going to achieve really great things over in East Milton. We've got to kind of focus on that, and we can look at other places for MBTA communities. So we're going to be looking at kind of similar to the exercise that we did very early on, where I kind of threw some parcels out there in terms of non-residential. Larger parcels where multifamily development might be appropriate. And so we're going to have them look at the Thomas landscaping parcels plus the Animal Rescue League parcel behind those, the one that's kind of landlocked between Chickatawbut and the back of that area. And then we're also looking at 1200 Brush Hill Road. these are, again, these are things that are non-residential, large parcels, have the potential for, actual kind of real redevelopment. We're not going to be looking at similar density levels as we are kind of closer to the transit area. One thing you sort of have to start to look at is, it's one thing to zone for multifamily on top of the train station where there's amenities. It's a different sort of exercise to look, further afield, adjacent to the Blue Hills. I think we'd be looking probably closer to, Fuller Village style density levels, which is obviously more dense than single family housing that we have otherwise in the area. But again, we're trying to look at what precedents are that are already in our community and have been, more or less acceptable. We've got to test these areas and find out what they do for our density numbers, because I characterize the challenge this way. There are two, primary constraints that we're dealing with in terms of our options. One of them, again, is, I would correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I have my finger on the pulse in terms of we're not looking for a lot of demolition and tear down and dramatic changes to the physical character of the transit area. I think, when you're zoning and you're creating by right zoning, you're sort of giving up a little bit of control in terms of these things in the future. So you got to make sure you get it right when you write the regulations. So, I think what we're after is giving those parcels and giving those houses the best possible chance for renovation, addition, redevelopment, rather than tear down new construction. That's not a guarantee that won't happen, but I think what we're really kind of laser focused on is what kind of densities can we propose, what kind of dimensional regulations can we propose that are compliant, but also give these parcels the best possible opportunity to kind of succeed in the kind of form that they have. So that's one constraint. The other constraint in the transit area especially is a lot of these larger parcels where you can sort of zone for more kind of proper apartment buildings are in the business district. And, like we talked about with 440 Granite Avenue, where, there was a kind of a proposal where, a portion of the ground floor is commercial and a portion of it is something else. We're looking to gain commercial space, and if not just remain kind of the status quo, and losing commercial space would be not good. We have very little commercial space in town to begin with. The tax implications are there. I personally and professionally don't think it's a tremendous risk if, someone that's building in Milton Village, is there because of the potential to provide commercial amenities in addition to sort of other types of redevelopment. But when you do by right development, and the guidelines say that you can't, you can allow mixed use, you can allow commercial, but you can't require it. So the other thing that we need to do is set the minimum possible by right scenario that gets us compliance and that gets us to the density levels that we need, and then figure out what is an increment that is reasonable, for the town, but also attractive to development, where we can say, okay, you can do X by right, but you can do Y via special permit. And that special permit allows you to require ground floor commercial space. It allows you to require, not dissimilar to the stuff that we did in the Milton Village zoning and the stuff that we're looking to do in East Milton. And so when you do that, you say like, okay, you can do this by right if you wanted to, and if you want to have commercial grade, and if not, there's nothing we can do. But here's a really attractive option, as long as you provide us some commercial space. So those are two constraints in the transit area that really depend on sufficient density outside of the transit area so that we're not dragging down our density numbers with the kind of special requirements that we have in the transit area. So that's the challenge of the modeling exercise. We're going to see what comes back from MAPC. If there's an additional desire to test other areas, we can certainly do that. But I think we want to make sure, there's a lot of, sometimes I think of it like the guy spinning plates. There's 5 different plates spinning in the air, and you've got to make sure all of them stay up. The other thing that we want to be conscious of is, okay, we're getting to our density levels, but we don't need to be zoning for 5,000 additional units. We're only required to do 2641. I think we want to try to hit that mark as close as we can. It's a significant amount of density. It's a significant amount of new units. And so just making sure that in order to chase one metric that we need to get a minimum level of for compliance, we're not also kind of overshooting another one to a kind of intolerable degree. So those are the challenges that we're trying to work out with, with our technical assistance providers, via the compliance model. What my goal is in sort of these modeling exercises is to give the planning board and the town, here's a set of sub-districts that achieve what we need to achieve and actually probably achieve more than we need to achieve, so that there's an actual opportunity to, be deliberate about, okay, we can pare this down, we can change this level, we can sort of do other things elsewhere. Step 1 is finding out what scenarios hit our minimums for compliance. And then, because it's a real tightrope with this stuff, in terms of, we want to have meaningful input from the planning board. We want to have meaningful input from the community, but there's certain things that we just don't have a choice on. And so, if it sounds like we're asking our technical assistance providers to model a lot of areas and to model a lot of density, it's because we are. Because that gives you something, if we were to come back from our technical assistance providers with, here is on the nose 2461 units at 15 units per acre, don't change anything. I don't want to do that. I want to give the planning board flexibility to work with. And so that's kind of, there may be some eye-popping numbers that come out of these exercises. I think the goal there is to, again, model more than is necessary so that you can start to trim things in a way that makes sense and is deliberate. So that is, I'm going to try to consolidate that explanation for our public forum next week. But I think the goal of the forum next week is to kind of let people know what the compliance modeling exercise is, what it's trying to achieve, and kind of, setting expectations for folks about what they're going to see out of this stuff in the future. The other thing that we want to do at the public forum is, do a little bit of an exercise in terms of form. And I hesitate to say design because we're kind of limited in terms of, what we can require from design. But, when we talk about multifamily housing, even at different density levels, there's a ton of different types, that are out there. And I think we want to get a little bit of feedback from folks about, like, okay, assuming that we're going to have 3 family houses in this part of the district, what types of this type of housing do you think are appropriate and where? And I'll give you an example. When you set dimensional requirements and you say, the height limit is 2.5 stories or 35 feet. What that gets you is a 2-story house with a peaked roof, and what's under the peaked roof is your half story. And then you fit 3 units in there somehow. If you go up to 3 stories or 35 feet or 40 feet or whatever it is, then that opens up multiple different kind of typologies where you could have a wider house that also has a peaked roof, but that peaked roof kind of covers more area and it counts as a full floor. I live in a house not dissimilar from that, where the 3rd floor has significant living space because the sort of the footprint is a little bit bigger. 3 stories flat gives you the option for a flat roof building. Could be a 3-decker, could be something that looks different than that. But these are just things that, something as simple as the number of stories that you allow. And so I think that's going to have an impact on what we actually zone for. And so we want to get a little bit of feedback from people as to, what's the look of the housing that you think is appropriate here. I think it also kind of goes for some of the larger buildings in terms of, contemporary design versus traditional design, multiple small buildings versus one big building. So we're going to do a little bit of a mapping exercise to kind of ask people, what are your geographic preferences for where different density types should go, and kind of what are your kind of, a little bit of like a visual preferencing exercise of, do you like this type of housing? Do you like that type of housing? Again, there's only so much we can do in a by right zoning scheme to kind of do design, influence, but it's good information to have because there are things that you can do with those, with those kind of
Tim,
blunt force kind of dimensional requirements.
Can I interrupt you there? You said
Yeah.
that there's limited, but last time we talked about we could do form-based zoning, and we know we can do design guidelines. So we can.
Well, so I mean, Cheryl, on design guidelines, I'm actually skeptical about design guidelines because with design guidelines, who's the arbiter of those?
So design standards, then, like we did in Milton Village, we can do those.
Well, so that becomes, that becomes something more akin to,
Form-based.
a setback is a type of design standard. Now, obviously, we're probably looking for something more than setbacks there, but yeah, I mean, design standards. I'd like to get a little bit more advice about kind of where the line is between a standard and a kind of. Ultimately, what you're trying to avoid is asking the building commissioner, who is a kind of technocrat, to be making subjective judgments about design, right? And so you've got to draw those standards in a certain way. There are standards in the Milton Village zoning, but ultimately the planning board is sort of the discretionary review body. So those standards have a little bit more, I think, judgment involved with them. But I think your point is definitely well taken. That I think that there are certain design standards that we could probably cook up that that can put some influence, on the ultimate kind of built form of these things. And yes, form-based code is definitely an option.
But just like one, for example, Tim, I know we put requirements in that you can go a certain distance without an uninterrupted facade, and then you have to have some change in plane. So that's something that anybody can look at and say, oh,
Yep.
That's 40 feet of a blank wall and without any, three-dimensional interruption. So, or it's we put something in about having articulation of the roof. You can only go certain dimensions. We didn't say just articulate the facade. We gave dimensions in those standards, and we tested them out. So I do think it takes work to do it, because you have to test them out, but it's possible to do. And I just don't see how we can do this without that, honestly. Especially, well, in all of them. I mean, different scale buildings have different, I would think we have different standards, actually, because you're talking about Granite Ave, it would be a different standard than, let's say, a 3-family or a 4-unit.
Right.
And, so I do think whether we can get that in this technical assistant round or not, and if we have to delay this to get it right, like you said earlier in your comments, I think it's the visualization of that and how those standards work is what was important to Milton Village and having it pass. And I think if there's any hope of having something like this pass, it's going to be that people understand it and they can see how it would work in their neighborhood or in their neighbor's neighborhood. So I agree with that 100%. And we're going to continue to kind of have that conversation. That's going to be a big part of the public outreach and a big part of the input, that we're seeking from people. Because to the extent that we can influence that stuff, we want to influence it. And you have to know what people's preferences are. Again, the struggle and the tightrope is, there are certain things that are non-negotiable. The overall density is non-negotiable. We got to hit it.
and we got to hit it by hook or by crook. But I think to the extent that there are things that are negotiable, that are, we have ability to, to have flexibility and to have input. We want to make sure that, it's really about setting expectations for folks about, what we have the power to kind of affect here. And so I think we should definitely look really critically at those design standards for sure.
We have power on the design, on the density in some ways too, because we can have the average density. So we have power to have lower in certain areas that we've talked about. I think that's really important for people to understand too, like when you're at the forum next week. And also, Tim, if I may make a suggestion about the forum, when we talk about density, it's really easier for people if it's relatable. And so, if you say and you show a picture of 36 Central or 131 Elliott and you put the density next to it, I just think it's helpful for people to understand that. And even, like one of the things our residents see districts, even though the minimum lot size is 7,500, there's 7,500 square feet, there's many lots that are smaller than that. And we get to a density in those districts of at least 8 units an acre. And so, just to understand, if you say, well, the area around with these streets is already 8 units an acre, then 5 units an acre or 3 units an acre doesn't sound as scary in terms of density. I just think it's really important to continue to bring the public along in the terminology that we use. Like even urban design, like I'm not scared of the words urban design, but I know some people are. And urban designers just know how to take and do the visualizations. It's their training. Taking these zoning and these kind of words and making it into something graphic to communicate. So I hope we don't get caught up in the terminology of urban design. I know we had that before.
I know.
And I look at you because we
we
talked about that. But I just and I don't think you're alone probably in thinking that way. It's just that we have to set. It's better if we can explain jargon. We can explain these things. And for people to understand that setbacks in some of these districts, you and I have talked about, Tim, where the building, the house, the residence is off to one side, right? So there's a driveway on the other side. So if you, like I actually, last weekend, I rode my bike and walked the entire Elliott Street corridor there, from the Elliott Street side to the track, and I want to do more, but just to kind of see what the housing stock is there. And there's I want to drop some photos into a folder that we can share. I probably took like 150, but I want to label them by address. But just so that we can all begin to understand when we see these examples, where that might go, what's already there. Because there's already a lot of stuff already there. It's different on the Granite Ave because, there's not much there, right?
So Tim, I had a couple of questions just on, while we have MAPC doing some of this technical assistance work. We had talked about, I know Randolph Avenue, that is one parcel, but there were other parcels, including land that's in the land swap parcel and the 40B parcel. Are you looking at anything else on Randolph Avenue?
Well, the land swap parcel is, town meeting voted to swap that. So that'll be under conservation restriction.
Zoned, correct, at this point?
There, you won't be able to develop that though, so we won't get credit for it.
Unless the school vote fails. Right? The school vote fails.
If it doesn't.
The funding.
Right?
I think.
I guess
what's the next step for that vote?
Well, they have to go through this.
It's got to go to the legislature. So
it's got to go to the legislature. So it's still not a definitive thing. So is there time for us, I guess, to zone there?
I think I would not advise that, but we can test it.
So the other
and
question
see.
I had on, if you're looking at the Brush Hill Road, the 1200 Brush Hill Road parcel, couldn't we actually continue and do sort of what we're doing along the train line, is to include Fuller Village in that? Not that Fuller Village is going anywhere or any expectation, but that's an example of something like 88 Wharf and other areas that's already built. It already has higher density, that we could actually include that whole that whole portion of Brush Hill Road up till, Blue Hill Ave, that we could include that in there. It seems like that would make sense as a contiguous zone.
Yeah, we can probably make that adjustment. Again, what we'll want to try to do is set a density. So, with this exercise, it's kind of, I don't think Fuller Village is going anywhere anytime soon in terms of wanting to kind of tear down their nice buildings and build new ones.
Right.
But, you do have to zone kind of credibly for, if you, for instance, if you downzoned, Fuller Village and said, say there's, 20 units an acre there now, and you zoned it for 15 units per acre, that's not going to pass the smell test with the state. So you do have to set a level that's kind of credible. But I do think that, there's already multifamily down there already. More is obviously, does have potential impacts, but it is an area that, we know supports multifamily. And so we could definitely include that.
And then
we'll rope that one in.
Because I do know we've been talking about the DPW yard. Are you including that in? You're just doing a.
Yeah, there are really strict limitations on including public land in your zoning districts, and so you basically have to have, if it's not in your housing production plan as a strategic housing location, which the Granite Ave Park and Ride is in our housing production plan, the DPW yard is not. So if it's not in the housing production plan, it has to be a parcel that the town is sort of actively pursuing disposition of or redevelopment of, and the DPW yard doesn't have that right now.
But I don't think of the nursery as being. Is that on our housing production plan? I don't think that.
But that's not public land.
Because it's private. Okay. Well, all right. Because I know, like, the town of Rockport, they used town land, around their train station and zone there. So you're saying they had to that was in their housing production plan necessarily?
Did you say Rockport or Rockland?
Rockport did significant zoning around there.
Under MBTA communities, or was that for something else?
I believe it was. I think they were one of the first ones to zone under the.
No, they haven't. No one but Lexington has passed the zoning district yet.
Okay.
So if it was a different effort, if it was a sort of individual localized zoning effort, like, absolutely, they can zone whatever they want. But the state has guidelines for Section 3A that say, public land is excluded except for under these certain circumstances.
Can you?
And so
I think Rockport did pass it, and I think it's being appealed. I think they're actually.
10 residents are appealing it.
Yeah. I think it is under appeal. So, but I just would be curious to know, because I know that was municipal land, is why I ask. And then the other parcel, which I'm not sure if we discussed, is the Ice House property.
So the other, I've mentioned this in the past, but it's always worth kind of re-remembering. These things are kind of emblazoned in my brain in a way that they're not on others. So sub-district has to be at least 5 acres. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that the Ice House is a contiguous 5-acre parcel. Yeah. And the other thing is, you can't rope in conservation land, which that's surrounded by, in order to kind of increase the size of your district. Even if you could, that land is kind of classified as non-developable. So, like, if you kind of roped in conservation parcels to get to 5 acres, you're just kind of lowering your denominator in terms of the gross density. So even if you zone that for, like, a decent sized density on the parcel itself, that ratio gets dragged down by the non-developable land that's also in the sub-district. So it's a tough exercise to try to pull off. And I'll give you an example. One of the caveats in the public land, you can or you can't zone for it, is you're allowed to zone housing authority land. Because the thinking being like it's housing, it's publicly owned. There's a reasonable expectation that any redevelopment on that property will be for housing, and so you're allowed to rezone public housing land. I've tried a bunch of different permutations of a district around Miller Ave to kind of fold in the Miller Ave Milton Housing Authority land. The Housing Authority land is a little bit more than 3 acres. So in order to get a 5-acre subdistrict, you'd have to be kind of looping in some of those single family houses over there. And, given the existing density of the Milton Housing Authority land over there, and the fact that you're kind of looping in, almost a third of the site is kind of not going to be redeveloped because it's not going to meet a minimum lot size because they're all just single family houses. It's tough to get a decent kind of productive density out of that area. And so that's one thing that you have to be really cognizant of is the minimum size of a subdistrict, and then which parcels are actually contributing unit capacity to those subdistricts versus what parcels are just there to get to a minimum size and they're kind of dragging down your denominator there. So Ice House would be a tough one.
Well, just to clarify, Pope's Pond is not conservation land at the moment. And you just said it was non-developable. So town meeting just voted to put it into conservation. So that's my problem with Pope's Pond in this whole land swap thing. But anyway, that was just a side note. But also, what about 1094 Blue Hill Ave?
Which one is 1094 Blue Hill Ave?
Up by Curry, Boston Bridge. So I think that's only an acre. But then I was thinking you could make that as a 5-acre parcel.
Is that the Salamondo construction yard? Yeah, I mean, again, you'd have to fold in other parcels.
But we're doing that anyway in other parts of town, so that's, if we're trying to make it so it's in different parts of town, then we're going to have to fold in other parcels.
And minimum.
Right. So that's part of the reason why, we're up at Granite Ave, we're down on Randolph Ave, we're down on Brush Hill Road, we're from Milton Station all the way across. If you look at where we're proposing districts, and then you also think about where are all the 40Bs going, where are we doing zoning in East Milton? There's a lot of coverage all across town of some type of zoning or redevelopment proposal. So that's definitely something that we're keeping in mind. But the other thing that's, again, like I said, is driving or is going to have to drive some of the decision making around some of these other subdistricts is, are you allowing enough density in these other subdistricts to make up for the density that you're not getting in the transit area? And so we can certainly take a look at 1094 Blue Hill Avenue. That is, a parcel that, has redevelopment potential just by virtue of its use. But is the juice going to be worth the squeeze when we have to kind of rope in some other parcels that perhaps may not contribute unit capacity, but kind of contribute zoned area? So we can take a look at that for sure.
Can you look at 2 Granite also? And the boatyard across the street?
So let me bring up the GIS because I have been looking at it. 2 Granite Ave is a smaller parcel than you would think, and again suffers from the same kind of issue of when you look at these, the reason why, for instance, the transit area kind of larger parcel subdistricts, the reason those are going to work is because you've got multiple parcels that are contributing density to your numbers. When we look at some of these parcels that are really only one largish parcel, and then we're kind of drawing the subdistrict around it, you really have to crank up the density there to make it worth it. But let me just give a quick look over here. The other thing about the the boatyard is that's actually on DCR property, so it's kind of out. They're not going to let you zone DCR property unless it's in your housing production plan. And so 2 Granite Ave itself is 4.1 acres. And so, let me just look who owns this.
Send that one over.
We'd have to look at what the ownership is of kind of the marsh next door.
It's wetlands.
It's surrounded by undevelopable land. And that's one where, again, even if the parcels around it were, had an ownership that was doable, they're also, that's one huge parcel that makes up that marsh behind 2 Granite Ave. So again, you're getting productive density out of one parcel, and then the undevelopable area is just dragging down your denominator. But we can give that a look as well.
Because you could go pretty dense because of the height. You could go taller. That building's at least 6 stories, 5 stories,
I think it's 4.
4. Yeah.
I mean, I never see any anyway. That's the thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one to consider. I think that's.
So how does that work now? It's 4.1 acres, and then would you just absorb space beyond the conservation area to create a 5-acre parcel?
So the way that the compliance model works is it deals with the existing parcels, right? And so that's all it knows is what are the boundaries of the parcels, and then what are the dimensional kind of requirements that you put on those. So it doesn't anticipate site consolidation, and it doesn't anticipate or allow for subdivision. So if you were to zone a big acre parcel for, you can do 3 units on a lot, you're only getting 3 units on that, even though your minimum lot size, conceivably, you could chop up that parcel. So it's not modeling that. And it's a flaw in the model. And it's if you were doing a zoning process that didn't depend on this, model, you would probably do it differently. And so I'm not, I'm not making any bones about the fact that the model itself is providing constraints that are even beyond the guidelines. But so in the case of, so the reason I say in the case of 2 Granite Avenue is, that's a relatively large parcel kind of out in the marsh, but the parcel that is adjacent to it is, if it's not Town of Milton, it's DCR, but it's one big, probably itself 5-acre parcel of marshland. And so we don't have the ability to just snag a bit of it. It's you either snag the whole parcel or you don't. And so that kind of affects how you draw your districts.
So I'm still confused. So how do you get to the 5 acres in that specific example? Would you keep going till you found buildable lots? Or would you count
Well, the sub-district has to be 5 contiguous acres.
Right.
And so your only real option is the parcel you're after, and then however many contiguous adjacent parcels get you to 5 acres. And so that's why it's a problem at 2 Granite Ave, because that itself is 4.1 acres. And then if you grabbed the marshland next to it, you're up to 9 or 10 acres already with just grabbing that one parcel. And so then, how do you get to 15 units per acre on a non-acre parcel? Now you're zoning that 4-acre parcel for, what's 9 times 15, more than 100 units, which becomes, it might get you the density figures you need, but do you want that type of building over there?
But would they have to build the 100 acres, the 100 units, or could they build 50 or 30?
We don't have to build any, that's what you keep saying.
Right.
Yeah, they don't.
Zoning for it.
And that's absolutely true. But I think the thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you set up a by right zoning scheme, you have to, on parcels that you think are redevelopment parcels, and this is, it's not a very old building, but it's not brand new. And if you give a developer, a spicy enough incentive to redevelop, they might take it. And so, you can't zone for a 1,000-foot tower, in the middle of the Blue Hills, because what if someone built it? So you really do have to kind of look
It might be
about,
worth modeling that, just to add, just to take a
So
look.
Tim, I'm looking at the GIS and, we have the Granite Ave DC, state property, right? And then you've got the highway, and then you've got the two Granite Ave. So is there any way that you can link those two parcels? Because you've got the highway there. Can you just do a narrow strip that links them?
There's gotta be a way.
So this is something that I want to get a little bit of clarity on, because, whether there's just an outright prohibition of including non-developable public land in your districts, or if, the disincentive to do that is simply, our model is not going to give you credit for zoned capacity on these things. Because if the answer is A, then there's no chance. But if the answer is B, yes, you could conceivably do that, but like you'd be zoning just an incredible amount of territory between those two parcels,
I'm
because
only
again,
asking for the
we can't.
roadway to be only the roadway. Because it's a unique parcel, so I'm sure their model probably has difficulty with it, but this is where I go back to the state and say, we've got these two parcels, they're linked by a road, and then otherwise all this marshland around them. We want to make that a sub-district, ask them if it could be done. And because obviously we couldn't do it for the reasons you've already said, including all that marshland and so forth, that would make the parcel too big. So you have to be able to, if you have a district, normally what's connecting your district is roads.
Yeah.
Connecting your parcels are roads. So I don't see why Granite Ave couldn't link these two parcels, except that their model doesn't sort of account for some complexity like that.
And in farm world, a farm can be on the other side of the road. A road does not interrupt a farm.
It's worth finding
Yeah,
out.
it's
I
worth
agree.
finding. I think that would be great.
You're not going to do like a why did the chicken cross the road thing there, Maggie? It's not.
I'm not well, you could pull it up, Tim, right? You can pull up the GIS, right?
Yeah. So Cheryl, to your point, I'd be delighted to go to someone at the state level and kind of try to figure out if we can make that work, because I think it's a little bit unorthodox, but also, they're not exactly across the street from each other, but they're,
But here's the other thing
they
I
kind of
would
are.
say is that
They kind of are.
Yeah, so office space we've seen from COVID is being rethought. And, and that property, I mean, it really probably wants to be marsh, Maggie, but, it's all elevated because of flood potential. It's probably only going to get worse that way. But, I mean, there are places where you've probably seen this, Tim. Many cities are looking at their downtowns and how to convert office buildings to residential or other uses. So it's not an unreasonable thing to think that this could change, even if it is a relatively new building.
Yeah. How do I?
Yeah, right there. You see what I'm looking at
And
now.
then the connection is the road.
The road, yeah.
I think it's a fine argument to make. And so, let's test that. And, this is the kind of thing where I don't want to like sound cavalier about these things, but like if we give an otherwise entirely compliant district to DHCD and they say, well, actually, Granite Ave, you're not allowed to do that. I'd find that very hard to believe.
Yeah.
Because I think this is very clear for all the arguments that everyone makes. I mean, like we're trying to do redevelopment on parcels that are appropriate for it and that have the potential for actual like real stuff to happen. And so, just by virtue of, the kind of the hinkiness of their model. You guys you're persuading me about this. I'm starting to feel very strongly about this.
Good. I think
So,
that's.
and then what's the parcel just south of the DPW or the state DPW yard?
That's the American Legion Hall. So that's also,
That's captured.
when we talk about the Granite Ave district, it includes both of those.
Right. And then what's beyond that? What's more south of that?
That's marsh.
Yeah,
Marsh.
that's,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
So you could do those 3 parcels and create a zone.
I actually
Yeah,
wonder,
I-
Tim, if you, I mean, this is single family there, but Granite Ave, if you're going to pick a place
Yeah.
that makes sense to have some increased density, Granite Ave, in my mind, is one. Not that I want to tell people that, but if they end up selling some at some point, I mean, that road is just real challenging for single families, like in a driveway to back out, and I'm sure the noise and the air and so forth. Compare that to, say, Elliott Street or Capon Street. I mean, I would pick this.
Yeah.
And it would be highly desirable because you'd have a golf course view.
And then at what point can we start
Yeah,
assembling
Marcia, you.
lots? At what point do we propose assembling lots?
We don't propose it.
But developers.
But
will look at it.
developers could.
And that's what we have to be careful of, that we're trying to avoid that in this.
Well, there's lots of considerations. I think, it would be good to have a matrix of considerations for the different areas. We've talked about density and how to hit the numbers, but we haven't, and Tim's talked about the potential for redevelopment, and then we have to hit Elliott Street and really try and, I'll use that word, calibrate what could you do, and if it's maybe adding a unit there because we have to have a certain amount. But if we can figure out these other locations that really work well, then we can get as little of that that character zone in it. You know what I mean?
That's what, so I feel the same. I almost want to back into
As little as possible there.
on Elliott. Yeah, I'd rather go elsewhere and find the areas that are
Like these.
that aren't developing in neighborhoods and redeveloping neighborhoods.
And look, I want you people to know how serious I take this. All of these folks on Granite Ave, if there's development that's going to happen, are going to get, either they get on the highway or they're going to head right to Neponte Circle, depending on where the exit is, and right into the heart of where I live, and that's fine. All right, so that's how you know it's from the heart. Is that I'm feeling strongly about this. I think we should do it. So,
Good.
Oh, Tim, they're going to be able to get right on the
I'm being
Neponte
cheeky, guys. You
Trail.
guys
What are
can laugh at
talking
that.
about?
They're gonna bike.
Bike.
Bike, that girl, they're gonna bike.
We're gonna bike right the trail right
Right
down there.
there, yeah. As soon as they get that Morrissey Boulevard figured out.
So at what point do we sit around with a giant map of Milton and work this out?
Well, it's
They're
already
working on that.
That's what he is, and
And then at what point do we see your result?
on the 18th.
So yeah, well, so we're not going to have much new modeling for the 18th. I think we're probably looking at closer to the end of the month for MAPC to turn around their results. We'll get them this additional feedback to kind of test these additional kind of portions of districts. But what I want to spend a decent amount of time, next week, talking to the public about is a little bit about what we're talking about here today, just like the vagaries of the model, what the constraints are, why these districts are starting to look like what they're going to look like, and kind of what people can expect from the modeling. And I think, Meredith, I think you put it the right way of there's, and I don't mean, and, people are going to be watching this and people live all over town. I don't mean to say that, I take this very seriously about being very careful in every part of town, about making sure that we're distributing these things and we're not doing something, here at the expense of there. But I think it is absolutely true that there are unique considerations in the transit area that need to be kind of worked around. And so, backing into a set of solutions that achieve those goals while at the same time not overburdening or kind of, doing things elsewhere that are going to be really, intolerably impactful, I think is a really good way to look at it. And so the other thing, and the final thing, and we may have mentioned this at some point, either last meeting or another correspondence, we're trying to get a regular monthly schedule of these public forums going so that, irrespective of where we are in the process of getting new material from our technical assistance providers, there's going to be an opportunity, at least within a couple weeks to broadcast that, to the public in a meaningful and kind of hands-on way. And so,
Tim, can I
I think-
just have you think about these forms a little bit too, and that I've been in some communications with some folks who really don't know what the word zoning means even. And so, I think it would be useful to do every one of these forums, you might assume that people are unfamiliar and they haven't heard about MBTA communities. So take the very beginning, talk about what the zoning is, how Milton, is mostly zoned single family. We have these business districts, what this would be, and it can be an overlay similar. I don't know how deep we go, but to me, like the idea, people have had questions. Wow, our business districts, we don't want to take away our business districts, that this can be an overlay, just kind of some really 30,000, 300,000 level before you jump into some of the stuff that we've been talking about, because I think we'll lose people.
Yeah, and we published a kind of a frequently asked question sheet that was kind of based on, things that we heard from the first public forum, questions that we got via email and through our survey. Which I think covers, some of that stuff. And so I think, taking the opportunity to here's some really quick stuff that, will help set the table for your understanding. I think that's definitely, definitely good advice. And, the thing, we want to schedule these forums so that people, again, really important to just set expectations for folks that again, regardless of where we are, there's going to be an opportunity to come and ask questions and kind of, get the latest and greatest information. I don't know what the content and the agenda of the June forum is going to be, but I know it's important to have it. So we're going to put it on the schedule and kind of start to think a little bit more deliberate about that after the next one. So and sort of in the midst of all of that, we'll continue to be doing. We're working on another survey that we can put out there. We're always getting new people on our email list. With the nice weather, we're going to want to get out to the farmers market. We're going to get out to the concerts on Wednesday nights at Town Hall. So, we're really trying to, bring people to us, but also kind of get out there to where people are. And you should always, feel free to obviously talk to your networks and send people to me. I spend quite a bit of time on the phone with people on MBTA communities. Sometimes I'm on the phone for 45 minutes with someone that has questions, but I think it's worth it to do that if someone can walk away and kind of speak credibly to their friends and neighbors about this stuff without, a lot of, either misinformation or fear or, it's a big deal, but, I think I'm a big believer in having the information and kind of making decisions based on that. So, we're trying to talk to as many people as we can.
Is it going to be hybrid? Or
This forum is not. We're putting it together in relatively kind of short order. So it's going to be in person. It's going to be recorded, so we'll be able to disseminate the recording. I think future forums we'll try to coordinate either hybrid. We did the first forum, we did virtual. I'm sure we'll want to do another virtual forum. Just to sort of you bring in people that maybe can't make it to the COA or to the Keys room, wherever we have it. But we'll definitely keep that in mind, especially going forward for June and July. We wanted to get this one on the books, so we can start to kind of have that monthly kind of series.
And when you say get it out there at the farmer's market, what does that mean? Like print up a flyer and hand it to people, or you have a table there, or?
I've done this in the past. I've just set up a table at the farmer's market and people come and talk planning. We would produce probably some sort of collateral material that people can walk away with. So that's something that we'll be trying to work on. It's just trying to find those opportunities, where people are actually up and about in a crowd outside the house. So any advice that you all have, maybe we'll show up to Little League at some point and bother people about MBTA communities while they're trying to watch their kids.
so you guys making up flyers, and then we can, I could take a bunch and pass them out.
I could take a bunch too.
Or email.
Or email it, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a tremendous idea. So we've got, the big trouble is how do you condense all this stuff into something where we're not handing out, a 30-page kind of pamphlet to people. So we'll be working on that, and we'll want to kind of get that done, probably in short order after the forum. And I don't want to make promises that we can have it done before then because we've got a lot of work to do to get ready for it. But yeah, definitely happy to, produce those materials and just print out as many copies as you all need. I think a big thing that we've been doing is just sort of including the QR code that sends people to the MBTA community's website. I think we don't want to strictly do that. I mean, we've done that on flyers, for instance, that are like advertising events, but I do think there's value in sort of like a one-page kind of educational thing, really quick stuff, and then go here for more stuff if you feel like you need it.
Yeah, I think it's important to bring in more people than just the farmers market and your survey, because there's a much broader audience out there that should know this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. Tell all your friends too. That's one thing I always try to tell people is that, like, we're going to do our best to get information out there, and a lot of times you'll hear from someone that's like, oh, I had to hear about this meeting from my neighbor, and I'm like, good, I'm glad that your neighbor's talking about that. So yeah, absolutely, please, keep in contact with your networks. I know people have run campaigns to be here. Hopefully you still have email addresses and friends. So definitely kind of spread the word there. And any advice that you all have about where you think we can be effective in terms of outreach, we're obviously looking for that input.
So for example, the Facebook post and the town of Milton Facebook post, I shared that on Milton Neighbors, Everything Milton, Milton for Social Justice. There's all different sorts of Milton groups, and you could share it there. Plus, I took the image, copied it, and sent it in emails, because I do think we have to spread it whatever way we can think of to spread it. They have it in the Milton Times today's paper.
Right.
So I think it is on all of us to share it as much as we can too.
Plus, we're going to want people to know we're actually doing something, and it's not all Tim. Yeah. Right?
And I do think
honestly, that's what I think. I mean, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. But I think it is also good that we really keep moving on getting all of these other sub-districts pulled together, because we also don't want people to panic when they see a huge, the entire Columbine neighborhood, or, that large areas are, that's not necessarily going to be the way it ultimately will be. And then we're going to try to minimize
and again, I want to be I want to be clear about that tonight, and I'm going to be clear about it next week. Because and Jim, I appreciate the sentiment there. I'm here. I'm your kind of hands for a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of responsibility that I have to kind of get this done, on behalf of the town. But also, I think, you all have a really important role to play here as kind of the zoning folks. And so I definitely, I get concerned sometimes that I get up there and people are looking at me as the guy that's trying to, rezone their neighborhood. And it's like, I'm just doing what the state says, guys. So I think that, again, Meredith is right on the ball there about, let's get everything on the table and then start to figure out what can be taken off the table. I think is a good place to be in relatively short time.
So the other thing I would say is the select board is interested in this, and their meetings are, watched by a lot of people who may not watch planning board. So if you can get the announcement up, get them to announce it. At the last minute, I didn't ask.
That's okay.
Ask you.
No,
It was like at the last minute when I walked in, I thought, oh boy, I should ask Bob if he'll announce it. So he did announce it the last night. But that was very important.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. But I didn't clear it with anyone because I thought of it as I walked in.
No, I think that was great. So.
But anything like that, I mean, even get people to say it at their churches, their houses of worship or whatever.
Through the schools, like they have all the families' email addresses, and they have like weekly newsletters. So if you put together a flyer and then put it to the PTOs, and then they could, put it in the kids' backpacks as they're leaving on a Friday.
Or the superintendent's blast.
Yeah, that's something, we actually had some pretty good success with that with the bike plan. I was able to pitch that. I sometimes I get I get a little nervous sometimes asking to like get in on other people's things, but I think the bike plan had a kind of credible nexus with like schools and everything. But I think this is a big enough thing that, it would be worthwhile. I mean, people read those superintendent and those principal newsletters. It's bananas, but they get a lot of readership. So I think that's a good, I don't think we want to overdo it, but I do think this is something that rises to the level of, all hands on deck. Everyone's got to contribute to getting the word out. So when does the new superintendent start? Actually, that might be a good conversation to have as he walks in the door.
We have an interim. We do have an interim. There's an
Oh,
interim
yeah, that's right. That's true. That's true.
through June.
Okay, yeah.
I think they're still sending them out.
Yeah.
So maybe the way that we'll approach it, I think, is once because we wanted to sort of make sure that you all figured out your schedule for meetings in June before we started to like map out the monthly schedule. But I think now that we're sort of looking out a couple months, I think that might be a good kind of news hook. Like, hey, here's MBTA Communities. This is what we're doing. Stay tuned for monthly public forums on these dates.
Tim, what I might
And that'll be a
suggest
good way to.
is varying the day of the week in case people have commitments on Thursdays, for example. So while the 18th is a Thursday, maybe the next time it's a Wednesday or a Tuesday, just because other people, there's lots of meetings people are involved in,
And do you think monthly is
or
too much?
children's sporting or dance, or, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you think monthly is too much? Every other month? No?
No, we don't have enough time. We need monthly, I think.
Because we're going to get this done by December?
If we don't get it done by December, we can show a good.
We're going to
faith
try.
anyway.
But if
We're out of compliance.
I've said it before, we want to get it right. And if December is it, then it's it. And if it's not, then we're going to take the time that we need. Or I think we should take the time that we need. I should say I really don't have much to do with the decision making on that. But Jim, I hear you. But also I think there's going to be a demand to get knowledge on this and to have the opportunity to kind of, share people's thoughts. And so, if it turns out that, we reach the third public forum and no one shows up, maybe we'll rethink the strategy. But in the meantime, I think it's good to sort of set expectations for, because we hear a lot that like people don't know about this, they want information. So, we definitely want to be seen as giving everyone as much opportunity as they can to get information and be a part of the process.
And so by then, we'll also have the cost,
The cost-based analysis.
the impact. and
Yeah.
cost of-
Oh, yeah. Let me just mention that. So it's a little unfortunate. There's one firm that does a ton of this work in Massachusetts, and then there are other firms that kind of do it, to a fair degree. So I was able to find 3 firms. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the names of any of them, but they've all done this type of work in the Commonwealth. And so we sent that out. I heard back from one, unfortunately, was interested, but had staffing issues and probably wouldn't be able to issue a response. The big one definitely was interested. And I think we'll see a response from that firm. And then I haven't heard from the third firm, but I'll kind of reach back out. So I think we'll get a response. And if it's from, it's Mark Fajari, planning. If you ever look up municipal fiscal analysis in Massachusetts, 15 of his projects will come up. So he does it all over the place. If that's the response, we'll be in decent shape because it's very reputable, and a ton of experience in this type of thing. So I had set a deadline of early June for responses for that. So just to give folks a month to kind of take a look at the RF or at the solicitation and put together a response. As we get updates on that, if anything comes in earlier, we'll definitely let you all know.
Did Westford, maybe I'm getting my towns confused, but did Westford, did I read, they had a pretty good analysis done by somebody? I don't know where I read that.
I can look that up.
They were doing early work on getting their RFP, I know, out for hiring somebody, but I don't know if cost was included in that. All right.
So I think that's it for now. That was a lot.
That's
but
great, Tim. No, that was a good discussion. Good. And good suggestions. Did you have any other parcels you wanted
Well,
to?
I was just playing around here with the GIS, and I know Milton Academy is not likely to go anywhere. They've been there a long time, but they have some large parcels undeveloped, like 170 Center Street is 8.4 acres or 8.24 acres.
Cheryl, I have to get some clarity about like institutional land. I mean, this is the same that they don't want you to like take like the local university and rezone it because let me see what the guidelines.
Schools are some small colleges, and not Milton Academy, but some small colleges are closing. Maybe I don't know what'll happen with La Brea or Fontbonne, but those are pretty big. Or Curry, those are pretty big land parcels in a town like Milton. So,
Or even Milton Hospital. Hospitals are closing.
Yeah. So under the definition of excluded land, and they define it, means land areas on which it is not possible or practical to construct multifamily housing. They do include privately owned land used for educational or institutional uses, such as a hospital, prison, electric, water, wastewater, or other utility, museum, or private school, college, or university. And then the implications of excluded land is basically for purposes of determining compliance with Section 3A's gross density requirement, the DHC compliance model will not count in the denominator any excluded land located within the multifamily zoning district except public rights of way. This method of calculating minimum gross density respects the Zoning Act's definition of gross density while making it unnecessary to draw patchwork multifamily zoning districts that carve out wetlands and other types of excluded land that are not developed or developable. So, we can include that stuff in a district, but we won't get credit for the units. So there's really, especially with Milton Academy, there's really no sense in zoning it.
What about places of worship, churches?
I don't know. If 5-acre parcels.
I'm thinking of the one that abuts East Milton Square by Elliott Physical Therapy. And roll that into the East Milton Square.
I think he pulled East Milton because of the commercial. And we're doing zoning, overlay zoning there. So I think East Milton's not. But
yeah, I don't see anything about churches. But then again, you run into the issue of, can you draw a contiguous 5-acre sub-district? So I know some churches are bigger and smaller than others. But I mean, St. Pius, for instance, we got Woodmere because, St. Pius was a parish that was kind of on the chopping block, more than a couple years ago at this point. But, it is a well-taken point. Like these are uses that may not be there forever. And, do you want to give them a kind of, opportunity for something like that? So we can take a look at some of the church land.
St. Mary's is the school. I know that they said that's the school, so that doesn't count. You can't do the school, right?
What about
All right,
that? Isn't there a covenant or a nun's place up on Cary Hill somewhere? Mm-hmm. Is it St. Mark's Road?
no, it's off of Forbes. I think it's up, but not Forbes. It's on
Father Carney Drive.
Father Carney Drive.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've never
All
been up
right.
there.
Well, this is good.
Well, so let me just like finish with one thing. These are all great ideas, and I think we can hit our density figures with what we've got. So I think we're thinking of a lot of good ideas for districts, but also, I am confident that we'll get something. So. These are good things I think to keep in the back pocket. But I think we're now I'm sounding confident in a way. Now, as soon as I said it, I'm like, oh, what if it comes back bad? But I do think that we are fortunate and we are in a good place on some of these metrics. And I think there's a definite path forward on the other ones. So I think we're we'll find something that I think works. And then again, it becomes, okay, how do we kind of shape it in a way where we have flexibility to do it? So we will, we'll take a look at all this stuff. I think Granite Ave, especially, I think folding in Fuller Village, and then, maybe we'll take a little bit of a closer look, especially St. Mary's, like, especially if it's kind of within the transit area, we may be able to do a little something there if we can.
So at the forum, you will identify the neighborhoods that you're thinking of?
What was that, Maggie? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
At the forum, are you going to?
The zones, the other zones, are you going to talk about the other?
Identify the neighborhoods?
Yeah, no, I mean, we'll tell people, like, here's what we've tested so far. Here's what we're having MAPC test, currently. And that'll be something where, it'll be a good opportunity to get feedback on that sort of thing. Now, we want to make sure that we have the right discussion and ask the right questions. And I think, to Milton's credit, it's a hard conversation, but I've seen the conversation going on in other towns, and it's not nearly as productive as what we're doing. And so I think people are, engaging this in good faith in a way that is really helpful. And so, what we don't want to ask people is, where do you think density should go in town? Because I think if you ask someone that, they're going to make sure that they put it somewhere else that's not in their neighborhood, and it's not really that useful of information. So really helping people understand that, like, we're trying to spread this stuff around. And then, on that individual site-based level, kind of be cognizant of, we don't want to, like, push everything onto Brush Hill Road to kind of solve our problems on Elliott Street. We want to make sure that everyone is bearing a burden here. So we do want to be very upfront about that. I'm in a public meeting right now talking about it. We'll put the pictures up at the public forum. And I think we'll want to hear what people's thoughts and concerns are, because, again, some of these decisions are being made for us, by virtue of the restrictions and the guidelines. But there are other things that we may not be thinking of right now that folks that actually live in the neighborhoods will be able to tell us, that can inform some of our choices. So, I mean, it's why it's so important to go out there and talk to people about these things.
Terrific.
Is there any effort to sort of reclassify the T or do something to decrease our burden?
I don't know what the mechanism for that would be. I've broached the issue with the select. I mean, the select board would ultimately be the board that would need to sort of go there. It's not something that they pulled out of thin air. The Mattapan trolley is considered one of the rapid transit lines in the T system, and that goes into their capital planning, that goes into their operational planning. It's kind of baked into the T system. So when DHCD was doing their guidelines, they sort of piggybacked off of the T's classification for these transit lines, and so it's not as easy a thing to say, well, can we just change the classification? Because the classification is based on kind of a, for lack of a better term, a defined term somewhere else in kind of state government. And I think, quite frankly, it's a can of worms that I'm pretty sure DHCD is not going to want to open. Because if Milton goes in there and says, well, the Mattapan trolley, we don't think it's really rapid transit, then, you'll get, City of Newton that says, well, the D line isn't rapid transit either. And I don't think anyone at the state level is interested in having that conversation. So, I think, that's my opinion on this. I think if others feel differently and want to pursue it, the town is obviously, it's their prerogative to kind of represent their interests however they feel they need to. But I just think it would be a really tough row to hoe. And probably would not wind up being successful.
So you're not going to do anything, as the planning board, we're not going to do anything with that.
I would say that would be something for the select board. I agree. I think we need to look at it from where, how, I mean, all the things that Tim's been talking about is the stuff that isn't really in our sort of court normally. And I think that's where we keep our focus.
The only thing, though, is if we do get reclassified, the number will go down. The 26.
Yeah, they can work on that independently, I think, but we just keep plugging away. We can't wait for that, I don't think.
I think that would be worth having a conversation, especially in light of the way, the MBTA has, that we're suing the MBTA for not being compliant in repairing the stairs. So their lack of compliance, I think it's worth a conversation with the select board to see if it would be considered, because it could possibly give us an additional year to create our zoning, which the commuter line has 2 years, and we have a really tight deadline on ours. And it's a much more complicated site because of our proximity to the city.
One thing I would say is, just given the 40B experiences and how the state has viewed Milton, instead of trying to comply, like fighting compliance, and then we weren't favorable at any of the 40Bs. And all that 7 years of litigation on Randolph Ave yielded nothing, except a lot of legal expense. I think we're in a better position to do the analysis and then go back and say, wherever we land, is say, look, we really did all this work, and we still think that this number's not right. Because then you're not just saying, oh, we don't want it, we don't want to comply, we don't think we can do it. It's like, we did a lot of work. And we're really thoughtful about the work, because we're really looking at what's on the ground and where we can do it and what makes sense. So
I think, and Meredith, obviously, if you want to talk to the select board and have a conversation about this, again, obviously it's your prerogative to do that. The way that, for instance, City of Newton is approaching, it's not a similar issue, but it kind of is. They've got the D line. They've also got some really, pardon my French, crappy commuter rail stations out there in Newtonville and West Newton and Auburndale, constantly complaining about these things in terms of their condition, in terms of their layout. And they're using this as like, look, we want to play ball. We believe in this. We think it's, it can work for our city. We think it's good for the region. We're going to hold up our end of the bargain. Is MBTA going to hold up their end? You want us to build housing around these stations, but the stations are falling apart and you can't stand on the platforms. And I think we're even in a better position than City of Newton is, because really there's no, as far as I know, I could very well be wrong. I don't think there's a plan in place to fix those stations in the same way that like the T's in the middle, ostensibly, of a Mattapan line transformation project. It's focused on the rolling stock right now, but the next phase in the plan is station improvements. And so, for the town to be able to say like, look, we're out here, we've got single family housing around 3 of our, T stations. We're using this law as a tool to address that, to meet the regional need. How are you going to help us meet our needs? Let's get cracking with this transformation project, because it's needed. So that's an alternative approach to, I think, because I think it's absolutely right. In the best of times, the Mattapan trolley runs at more frequent headways than even the red line does. So we're giving more frequent service on the Mattapan trolley than the line that the Mattapan trolley dumps into. But this is not the best of times. It may very well be the worst of times. And so, that's across the system. Everyone is dealing with some form of degraded T service. We've got stairs that are crumbling and cars that, don't have air conditioning and you can't get in them in the wheelchair. Other people, the trains are catching fire, or there's a slow zone throughout the entire length. So everyone's dealing with it. And I think it is a credible thing to say that, like, the thing that makes MBTA community zoning function is you've got the housing on one hand and you want people living near transit, but the transit's got to be usable. And so, I think I think it's a strong argument to make to the state to say, we're doing our best. You gotta do your best too.
Have you heard any rumor that the trolley is going to be replaced with the trolley will be replaced with an electric bus in that 10-year plan?
I mean, that's not happening.
It's not happening.
The current Mattapan trolley transformation project came out of an initial conversation about potentially converting that corridor to a BRT, bus rapid transit corridor. And that was, maybe that was 10 years ago. That was pretty well squashed. And so, the planning now on the corridor is improve the stations, improve the current rolling stock, and then the last phase is to replace the rolling stock with more modern cars. So the bus, no one's talking about that anymore. It's not a thing. You all were very successful in squashing that idea. It got beat up pretty bad.
Okay. So I think that concludes our discussion for MBTA to be continued. And so unless there's anything else to comment on this.
Just, Tim, if you have any visualization materials ready ahead of the forum, drop them in a folder. I wouldn't mind taking a look at them in advance.
Okay. I'm not sure that we will, but anything that we get, we will share immediately.
All right. And I'm sorry that Sean's not here to see us adjourn at 9:15. So, but
That's an easy motion.
That's an easy motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye. Good evening.
Thanks, Josh and Tim.
Thanks, Josh.